I think we are ready to hear from investors. So my approach will be very simple, is to pose some question to the panelists, and then I'll leave a floor for like 4 or 5 people to ask some critical question to the investors, because this is a golden opportunity even for me to sit with Dobe. It's not something easy. So just to start, I think it'll be great for the 2 panelists to introduce themselves, because I know Michael has done the same, so that we know who we have here. So welcome, Eva.
Great, thank you. My name is Eva Warigia. I am the Executive Director at East Africa Venture Capital Association. It's actually East Africa Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. We are the trade organization for private equity and venture capital funds, acting as the intermediary between enterprise and the capital sector. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome, Eva. And now, Brigit, welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
No.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It sounds like you have been trying to get in touch with me, and it was very difficult. I'll give you my number, you call me and I'll pick up, no worries.
Good, good.
So my name is Brigit van Dijk. I'm the CEO of Dobe Equity. I'm a private VC, private equity investor with an office in Dar es Salaam. I'm based in Tanzania, and you're right, I'm afraid I'm one of the very few private investors with an office in Tanzania. But also I'm happy to announce that ever since we put foot here in Tanzania, we've quadrupled our portfolio in Tanzania. So I think it makes really sense, and I see a lot of opportunities. Maybe just very briefly about Dobe Equity. We're a single family office private investor with roots in the Netherlands. We're an impact investor. What does it mean? Is that we're a long-term investor with the objective to put growth capital into early stage or more mature companies with the aim to get a decent financial return, but more importantly also to drive social impact in terms of creating employment and give companies access to capital for them to grow and provide quality and affordable goods and services to the end consumer. So it's impact both financial returns as well as social impact through private sector development. Very briefly, we invest in all of East Africa. So we have exposure in 5 countries: Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Kenya, and Tanzania. My background, I've been in private equity venture capital for more than 20 years. Across the globe, that sounds big. I'm just a Dutch person that happened to work for companies with a global scope. The reason why I would like to mention is that I have experience investing in Europe, as well as Latin America, Asia, and across Africa. So we will reflect on Tanzania later, and I think, I've got some reason to be able to compare Tanzania to other markets. I'll leave it here for the moment.
I think we should thank her for coming here. We have few VCs in Tanzania. I think Dobe, they have a HQ here. That's a great thing. Most of them, they are based in Kenya, so it's good Dobe are here. And Michael, you can give us a brief about you and how you are interacting with the PE.
Yeah, sure. I tried to keep the intro short before. So I work for Clyde & Co. We are we're a large global law firm, 53 offices around the world, and we've also got the largest fully integrated presence here on the ground in East Africa. I'm a partner. I lead the corporate M&A and private equity practice, one of 5 partners here in Tanzania. As I mentioned, active across the region, but by nature of the fact that we've built the business originally here in Tanzania, that's been the core of where we've done on most deals. In terms of stuff that's been announced, I mean, we've done deals with Catalyst, we've done deals with Africa Invest, we've done deals with, so we acted for a very large hotel chain who just did a $56.5 million deal in Zanzibar. I think one of the challenges here in Tanzania is that most of deals are not announced, which makes it quite hard to promote and tell you about all of the things that we have done. But despite discussions around, there's never any deals in Tanzania, etc., that simply isn't true. There is a decent pipeline, as I'm sure Brigit would attest to, but you just probably have to dig around a little bit to go and look for it.
That's great. So, Eva, there is this issue of US and China. We have seen, like last year, that China secured over 32% of all the investment that were poured in the PE environment, and the US is around 49%. So the two countries, they are taking around 79% of the total investment that is done globally. What is so special about these two markets?
If you ask me, what is special about those two markets is they've been in existence for over 200 years. And so they've had pretty much all the time in the world to create the structures and infrastructure necessary to develop proper financial systems that allow investors to readily, with quick turnaround, deploy capital in those markets. Having said that, I also think it's a bit unfair to compare where we are as Africa to those markets. Our needs are different. There's a lady called Dambisa Moyo who's an economist, and she wrote this book about Africa and investing in Africa. So when she gives a comparison of investing in those markets versus here, and I think the earlier panel alluded to it, when we invest in Africa, we're investing to solve real problems, to create real opportunities that have a real impact on real people. Sometimes in the developed markets, in part because they've been there for so long, they are innovating to stretch their imagination. It's Elon Musk and going to space. Here we are still grappling with the challenge of water and sanitation. So it's not so much why, so that's the other point, the fact that because it's real problems and real people, we sometimes have to take some time to think about how to execute properly because we have actual impact on real lives. And then the third one is the capital is from those markets. So it's pretty much people lending to people they already know. Whereas in Africa, we're still, as Michael pointed out, very dependent on foreign capital to invest in our private sector, including startups. So until we can create systems where we are raising money from the continent to invest in the continent's businesses and opportunities, I'm afraid those markets will continue to be the leaders. And I think after those US, China, the third one is going to be Europe, and then the fourth one is East Asia. And it's because those markets are able to raise money from their own regional economies to deploy to their startups, to deploy to their enterprises. So it's also a challenge for us in the industry. How do we start mobilizing the money available on the continent, whether it's from our family offices or generational wealth, our pension funds, our insurance companies, our sovereign wealth funds, to invest and catalyze enterprise on the continent. So if you ask me, they have the infrastructure, but also they have the capital on the ground that they're willing to invest in their own markets.
But Brigit, the last 5 years, China investment was around 4%. In 2018, it went to 32% of all the PE investment. This is a big raise from 4% to 32% globally. So what is missing in our region?
I think it's difficult to compare US, China with with East Africa just as a shortcut. I think it would be interesting to see where the money has been coming from that has been invested in US and now in China. I tend to believe that there's a lot of capital being unlocked if the opportunities are seen on the ground. US, I guess, is famous for its high-level entrepreneurship and also high-level of capital being made available by angel investors. So I think there's a win-win for both the entrepreneurs, as well as the investors. For China, I think same. It would be interesting to see where the monies are coming from. But usually capital flows where there is a large demand and an understanding of proper entrepreneurship, and as you are rightly pointing out, Eva, where there is an environment that enables investors to safeguard their exposure, meaning a legal enforceability, support to entrepreneurs, a high level of skilled labor force, good level of education, but also, for instance, well-developed capital markets. I think for each and every investment, investment is just the start. Every investor will look at also how to divest from that investment. So you need to have decent capital markets, stock markets, a secondary market to buy assets, market for mergers and acquisitions. So there's a whole lot of different variables, in my view, that are needed to make a country very attractive. And then, as you already pointed out, Mike, is you need good stories. And I think that is also something that East Africa needs. But you can only have good stories, obviously, if there is good investments. So I'm not too pessimistic about East Africa, because if you looked at the capital raised for Africa maybe 10 years ago, it was very, very small. And today, I agree with you, Mike, there's a lot of capital flowing into Africa, there's a lot of capital raised, yet there's too much capital now going after too few deals. So what we need is really a revolution of entrepreneurship in Africa, East Africa, Tanzania, to show that the investment opportunities are here, attract the investor to the region, and start making good investments and create those success stories. But it will come, it is already happening, but yeah, we're all a little impatient maybe, but I see good developments already happening.
Oh, great. But Mike, the few deals that you've closed in the country, those investors that they've come in this country, what they told you about our country, maybe the opportunities that maybe other global investors have not seen here. Maybe can you give us a brief for the few deals that you've closed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's more than just a few, Andron. But, I mean, we've done quite a few. Look, I think just to address the wider point first before we drill down to Tanzania, yeah, it's all about risk versus reward. And, and as Brigit said, 10 plus years ago, there was a relatively small amount of money being raised for investment in East Africa because, relatively speaking, it was very, very high risk. And frankly, the reward opportunity was relatively low. Now, I'd say what we have seen over the last 10 years is a change in that, like when you look globally, it's still high risk. These are super frontier markets, even in Kenya. But the reward opportunity has increased. And, as we see, countries, economies grow, there's a, significantly growing consumer base, that opportunity, again, continues to grow. So you see the risk level still remains high, but the reward level sort of creeps up. And I think it also has to be viewed in the round about what's happening in the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is not in great shape economically. In most markets, you look at the US, it's kind of on a bumping along the bottom. China, we're seeing a slowdown that in a way that hasn't happened for 20 years. Europe. I mean, let's not even talk about England and Brexit. But, you know, so there is a, you know, so I do see a paradigm now where, you know, yields drop elsewhere, people start to have to look for new markets, which can only play to, you know, to the benefit of East Africa and also to Tanzania. What in particular attracts people about Tanzania? I mean, there's such an enormous list about, you know, as to why you would invest in this country. You know, you look at, you know, the natural resources, you know, the stability of government, the fact that, you know, you've been able to deliver economic growth over the last 20 years, you know, at around 7% GDP. You know, when you view that against a lot of other African countries, there's a lot of things that are attractive. I think there are, of course, challenges as well, and you know, you know, I suspect that's probably for another question for us to drill down to. But it's things like, you know, if you look at, I don't know, you look at like an opportunity in, I don't know, if you were to invest in agri-processing or edible oils, for example. I mean, you've got a population, you know, here that, you know, everyone is eating a meal every day. So there's huge opportunities there. And I believe Tanzania is a net importer of edible oils at the moment. So, yeah, I guess the multitude of opportunities is almost endless. It's almost difficult for people to pick where to go.
Yeah, sure. But from a side, Brigit, you know, when we went to pitch events, normally investors are asking us that, you know, I don't invest in a company because you don't have traction or you don't have a quality team. But I have a good idea. So I'm asking, why DOB is not using an approach of, you know, invest and build my company? We build together, you know, then you have a good exit. Why the invest and build approach is not common in this market?
I think every investor looks for a company that is innovative, so unique in its sector, in its segment, and that is scalable. So a company that can really grow and where you have the strategy and projections that a company can grow, also to create economies of scale internally, but also become more profitable. But to execute such a strategy, you need to have quality teams. Scalability, innovation can only be driven by the skilled entrepreneur. Just to have the idea and not being able to bring together a team of people then who can execute it, I think there's very few investors who might be interested in doing so. Fortunately, I've met a huge pool of successful and skilled entrepreneurs in Tanzania. Yet what I also do find is that we need much more educated and skilled people and labor force here in Tanzania for companies to grow at a certain scale. But I think it's all about entrepreneurs and management, and I think every business school where you would go to and you talk about investment strategies, eventually the idea is one thing, but most importantly is about your execution power, and that really is in the hands of the entrepreneur. So it's really all about entrepreneur management.
But Eva, there is a word that Brigit mentioned, scalability. What investors are looking about this word, scalability? They're asking you know, your solution should be scalable. Are you talking about global scalability, in-country scalability, in a world scalability? You know, what's the scope of the word scalability?
I'll address that, but I first wanted to address the other question, just because I feel there's a few people who are entrepreneurs in the room. Now, first of all, I don't know if you want an investor who will come in and control your business as a startup, at least at the early stage.
But personally, I'm fine. You know, put money, put your people.
I don't know about that model. Yeah. But, so it also sometimes is to protect you when you're talking about scale your team first, come in with a strong value proposition, and then we partner together. And then beyond just protecting you. You have to appreciate that investors, at least on our continent, do not have very extensive teams. They have a very short window to invest because they are fundraising over 10-year cycles. So, and they're required to invest in more than just your company. So it would be a bit of a stretch for them to come in and build with you, which is why they focus on the team aspect. And the last one, and probably the one that's most important, and I see this a lot when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, is sometimes enterprise has the risk of being very focused on the product development or being technical experts. And as an investor, we're looking at you as more than the technical expert. You could have excellent skills in software development, we don't challenge that, but you want us to invest in you as a business. So we also want to see that you are more than a technical expert. We want to see you thinking like a business, because that is when we are able to grow together to unlock the value of your business. So that aspect then is part of the reason why we may be hesitant to come in and do co-build with you, buy and build, and encourage people to come in with the technical skills. I mean, the leadership and the technical teams beyond the ideation.
But don't you think that if you invest and build, you could get millions of startups? Success?
Or not. And then the burden is left on me. You know? But to go back to your question about scale, now, private equity and venture capital in East Africa is largely growth focused. And when we say growth, what we mean is we earn our money by being able to show the value in growing this business from point A to maybe 2A or 3A. And there's various strategies for growth, and some of you have business school expertise, but I'm just going to point to a few. So ability to grow either in terms of your market capture, if you're number 3, moving to top 2 in the market share, ability to expand across a region, or introduction of products. And largely that's the scalability that's looked at. It's not necessarily being so massive, conquering the world, but is your business able to move to the next level? Remember, these are people who are going to, at some point, exit your business at a value that's hopefully attractive for their shareholders, because they owe someone money and they have to give it back. So how can we realize profitability of your business? And that is what we mean when we say scale. It's not so much conquering Africa or conquering East Africa or conquering the world. It's scaling in a way that we get both of us, yourself as the owner and us as supporting partners, being able to realize the growth potential of your business. And I think that is something that both sides should be able to view positively and work towards.
Back to you again. You are coming from Kenya. We've seen in East Africa, Kenya is raising a lot as compared to to other countries. So what are the opportunities that are there that investors are seeing that we Tanzanians are not able to to attract those investments?
Yeah, so EAVCA sits in Kenya, Nairobi, and from there we have a regional mandate. We cover 5 countries: Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, as well as Kenya. And I think part of the reason there's a lot of inflow into the country is what Brigit, Michael mentioned. There's a lot more people sitting there, so they're able to identify and pick opportunities a bit faster because they're already on the ground. And that's one of the risks of not having a local presence, that some deals may not be within your visibility, and it's a bit of a disadvantage. If you look at a country
to attract those
like
investments.
Ethiopia, if I just use that example, there's a lot more PEs that sit in Ethiopia. I think we have about 9 right now. 9 Ethiopia-focused funds. And because they sit there, we are seeing a lot more activity in Ethiopia, so much so that in our study as EAVCA, we found that after Kenya, Ethiopia was the next highest private equity activity hub for the region. So there's a direct relationship between people being on the ground and being able to unlock the deals on the ground. So that's one. And then the other thing is, someone mentioned it in the earlier panel. I think we have a bit of an aggressive culture. So people are able to push and shove themselves away.
Does it mean because Tanzania started from socialism, that's a problem?
No, I don't necessarily think so, but I just find that guys are a bit more, they want to get it done and get it done fast. So I think the only other people who rival that is Nigerians. If you've ever invested in Nigeria, Eric would know. It's a bit of a cutthroat place. So in that sense, I feel that guys will go out on to the market. I mean, you raise Series A, and then 6 months later, someone is raising Series B, and I'm like, were you just not in the market the other day? And we always want more money, so I think that also helps.
But Brigit, from your
Can I
interaction
say
with the
something,
startups,
please?
yeah?
Can I say something, please?
All right.
What I've experienced sitting in Tanzania is that Tanzania is doing one thing really good, is creating negative stories about itself in the newspapers, locally and internationally. I think one thing, let's stop doing that. There's great opportunity in Tanzania, let's bring the good stories out. And I think it reflects, it reflects to investors, because investors are reading the news. If you look at CNN and we get these stories about Ebola, for instance, quite recently. So why is Tanzania in the news for Ebola? I really wonder. But these are international investors who then might think, well, let's not go into Tanzania. There's other stories about, having no opportunity to get your work permits, your residency permits, what have you. We need to create an environment that enables investors to come. But that is all known. We should stop looking at neighbors like Kenya. Kenyans feel that they are great people, but it will also bring the story about Kenya, and then look at Tanzanians as being slightly different. I don't see any reason for Tanzanians to play the underdog. We should stop playing the underdog and bring the good stories out. There's plenty of good stories.
Thank you, Brigit. I think you've been very open about the many issues that are facing us. Let's go to Michael. There is this issue of fair commission competition that for an investor to invest in a company here in Tanzania, we need to go for the Fair Competition Commission notification because they normally look at the threshold. Our threshold in Tanzania is very low, I understand. And the definition of how the merger is supposed to be is also very difficult because it's looking at the global and global assets and the global turnover of the buyer. So do you think this is the main reason that we are not able to attract investment in this country?
Absolutely not. And you would hear the naysayers in Nairobi complaining about it, but in my opinion, it's absolutely no barrier to foreign investment. All it is frankly you're looking at a delay of about 6 weeks to 2 months to complete a deal. Now, that's of course not ideal, but I wouldn't see it as a real barrier to foreign investment. I think if you were to look, to really drill down into the fair competition legislation and procedures, etc. Now, I think the starting point is it's a good thing, and it's right for Tanzania to have a framework, which they do, to examine the competition elements of relevant mergers and acquisitions. If I was to have the freedom to tweak the process and the legislation in any way, I think I would invite the FCC to perhaps look again at, or to regularly review the relevant thresholds for notification. Now, it was great, we saw the threshold increase pretty significantly about 18 months ago, which was wonderful. And so I think just to keep a regular review of that ongoing, because sometimes I think there is a perception amongst foreign investors is that there are deals that are going through the FCC process where there isn't really going to be an obvious effect on competition because the deal size is so low. I think we applaud the fact that the commissioners were, the new commission was reappointed with breakneck speed a couple of months ago, which is marvellous, and certainly compared to how things were 2, 3, 4 years ago, I mean, deals are getting reviewed by the FCC much more quickly, and we even saw something, must have been about 2 weeks ago, where we had a colleague sitting with the FCC when they had a public hearing for a deal, and the FCC actually issued the clearance certificate and the merger analysis that very same day, which was, again, absolutely fantastic, and demonstrating these mechanisms working as they should. But just to answer your question, it's not a barrier. There are ways it could be streamlined, but definitely not a barrier.
Okay, great. So maybe now I can give a chance for the participants to, if there is any specific question to pose to the panelists.
Thank you. I rarely speak in public, but I felt I should speak. And particularly, I'm supporting the great lady from the Netherlands. I stayed in Netherlands for about 7 months. I'm reading this from The Citizen. 3 Tanzanians, Kennedy Mari, Petfrida Paul, and Felix Manyangote, ranked among 100 most influential young Africans 2019. Are you hearing this? So this business about being aggressive or nothing, Tanzanians work very quietly but in great strides. We don't make a lot of noise, but there is noise coming. There are some countries who want to have Magufuli for a while on a higher purchase. Why? Because you are doing great things. We don't make a lot of noise. Now, I wanted to say this because what are these young people, what have they done? Kennedy Mari is a Tanzanian public relations, strategic communications, and digital marketing practitioner. Exactly what we are talking about here. And he founded and ran Serengeti Bytes, a full-service communications, public relations, and digital media agency based in Dar es Salaam. Now, this other young guy, these are the 100 influential Africans from Tanzania. I need not say anything more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the interesting session. My questions go to anyone in the panel as well, as we were discussing about the investment issues. So I was just curious, why investors or the venture capitalists, they more interested in the organizations and they just forget the individuals. Just like me, I'm an author and I just want to publish something, but I was looking maybe for capital in order to do what I was intending to do. So I know maybe my work can be able to reach more people or more young people according to what I intended to reach to the young people. So as investors or ventures, how are you looking in that case, in case you are more interested in the organizations or someone who has a group or someone who has a company? What about these individual projects? Someone who is maybe want to be a singer, someone want to write something. How are you thinking about these individual issues? Thank you.
I'm happy to kick off and just say something. I mean, I'm not an investor, but I work with lots of investors, and I can tell you that when people make an investment, they're not investing in the organization. It's all about the individuals and the management teams. That is absolutely critical, particularly in more challenging frontier markets like Tanzania, like East Africa. It is all about sitting across the other side of the table saying, do I trust this person? Do I like this person? Do I believe what they're saying? So I would think there certainly is an opportunity to attract capital. I guess the question is, how are you going to make money? And then you need to basically convince the people with the money that if they give you $100,000, that someday you're going to give them more back.
Maybe now it's time to hear from the panelists. What do they advise the startup community in Tanzania?
Great. So just to follow on what Michael said, indeed, investment is all about the people, not the business. A business, really, the definition of a corporation is vague. So if you start defining a business as an investment, you may falter, but it's the people and the ability for those people to execute a strategy. And then there may be, so it's about looking at yourself and the idea or the concept that you have and how you can scale that and approaching someone who is aligned to you. Now, in addressing the startup community, like I said, we represent East Africa, so Tanzania enterprise is very much something we also push for as an investment potential for foreign investors. And Tanzania is indeed a corridor for investment. By sitting in Tanzania, you have access to the East Africa community. You also have access to the SADC community. So you should think of yourself like that in terms of opening yourself up to opportunities. You can tap into the South or the East, and I think that gives you a very strong vantage point. So keep doing what you're doing. There is no difference to other entrepreneurs in other markets. In Ethiopia, they still have the same challenges as you may have. So at the end of the day, you believe in your vision, and people will see that you are passionate about your vision and will be willing to put confidence in that passion. So keep the passion, keep the momentum, and be patient. So I think even from your introduction, you were patient and you didn't give up. You just took the feedback that people gave you and improved on it. So sometimes dealing with investors is not as fun, but keep at it and don't give up, and somehow down the line you will be rewarded for your effort.
Thank you, Eva. And Brigit, what should maybe your last word to the startup community? What should they do?
Oh, my last word. I'm someone of many words, unfortunately. So one last word is always difficult. That's a challenge.
Just pick the best one.
It's more challenging than investing in Tanzania. No, I'm joking here. So for me, I think Tanzania is rich of good entrepreneurs, and I think a young population that is relatively ambitious enough to make it happen. And I also think there's enough capital available as long as we show the good examples. For me, what is needed is really support from the regulator to create an environment that is really attractive for the investor and for the entrepreneur. Again, law enforcement, transparency on tax, the ability to bring in expertise from abroad if and when needed. Also, education, a proper infrastructure, because if those aspects are not there, it's very expensive also to drive and run your business and to really grow it. So we needed support from the regulator and the government to make it happen, because the ingredients are here in the room and are here at this conference. What I think is important is that a conference like this, Sahara Sparks, is driven by entrepreneurs, very ambitious people, and I think we agree, all of us here on stage, we also work together and try to bring investors and the entrepreneurs together. And I think we should join forces in making the venture capital and private equity space in Tanzania a success.
That's great. And Michael, in less than a minute, what's your last word to the startup community?
I think just to build on what Brigit is saying, one thing that Brigit and I have been, we've kind of joined forces over the last couple of years, and obviously with Jumane as well, trying to catalyze the investment ecosystem here in Tanzania. The thing that struck me after, I think I'd been living here for maybe almost 5 years, and I'd never met Jumane, and you just think the problem we find here, particularly in Dar, is the communities can be very, very fragmented, and unless there are specific focal points and stakeholders working together to bring everyone together, then opportunities get lost. So this is why, you know, Sahara Sparks is such a fantastic event. I think, you know, the more we can do to think about what other events we need to do to try and help, you know, grow that early stage. Because, you know, as I was saying earlier, the crazy thing is, it's not like the money isn't there. There are these huge pots of capital sat there with people saying, right, I want to invest in Tanzanian businesses. But at the moment, like, we're just struggling to be able to join the dots. So I think, you know, if we continue to work together to do more, we can help to, you know, get that capital into the places where it needs to be. And you know, we have more Tanzanian successful stories in terms of not just startups, but large, flourishing businesses. So, you know, of course it's challenging, but it's super exciting. And yeah, watch this space, more news coming soon.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. So thank you all for this.